Hey folks, it's Bear Gardener, and it's everybody's favourite time of the new expansion for cards, which is Blood and Iron, and that is balance changes, or okay, it's like my favourite time. The new expansion, it might not be everyone's, but I'm really quite excited to see what gets done. So, as always, I am a Kards Content Creator. You can find all my stuff down below, which will give you the links to my Twitch channel, and you can like and subscribe here on YouTube. Please do think about Twitch subscription or coffee if you can afford to do so. It does help out hugely with the cost of producing videos and software and everything that goes behind it. I've been covering this cards expansion in pretty significant detail since it was announced, so I'm going over all the different articles, card releases, spoilers, everything that we get, and seeing what I think and talking about my opinions on it. And balance changes are always a hot topic, because people always have opinions on what needs changing. So first of all, if you are newer to the game, what on earth is a balance change and why should you care? So, along with the usual deal with expansions, which is a number of cards leaving and a number of cards being added and or brought back from the rotation pool, because of the way rotation works in cards, you can find that out on my rotation video. There is also effectively a patch, a relook at different cards that are performing certain ways in the meta, and a rebalance, so cards get changed. Sometimes buffed, sometimes nerfed, sometimes kind of almost reworked, although that usually doesn't happen until they've gone into the reserve pool and rotated back in. So, we've just had, earlier on today, we got the drop of the balance changes article from Blood and Iron, and we're going to go and take a look at it, and I'm going to go through it in detail and explain what's going on with the cards, what I think the reasoning behind the changes is, and whether I think it's good or bad or indifferent, and generally give you my opinion for what it's worth of someone who's been in collectible card games for like 30 years, and has played competitively in different places, and has views, and does a lot of content on cards. So let's just dive in and see what we've got. So as usual, we open up with the little bump where they talk about saying hi, and there's a shaken not stirred joke. We've got some bits and pieces, and we are looking at, what have we got? We have 12 cards, 7 buffs, 5 nerfs. If you're not familiar with buff and nerf terms, buff means card being made better, nerf means card being made less strong. We'll see what is going on with it. So they say here that the purpose of these changes is focused on the new shiny stuff that is coming and either not overshadowed or is supported appropriately. That's probably going to be true for some of it, but not all of it, but I mean, it is a classic developer speak, but I will attempt to translate developer speak as best I can while doing this. So without further ado, we're going to hop to the first card being changed and see what we think. Okay, so the first card that we have in front of us is a German card. Germany has been very strong in the meta of late. It's very predominant. You see an awful lot of it both as main nation and ally. And we're actually seeing a change to a card which only recently arrived in the game, and that is the 738 Jager Regiment. Now, this is a relatively small change, but it's, I think, a well-considered one. So 738 Jager is incredibly good value for what it does. And I think just this little nerf to its defense. I mean, it's just a reduction of 1 defense. It's a light touch change, but it does bring it down from being as universally strong as it was. It means that you are kind of having to make a choice when you're looking between this and, say, the Panzer II, the Panzer IIa, I should say, which has the advantage of basically everything on this, as well as being a tank, but without the deployment effect, and now hasn't the 3 health, whereas this only has the 2, and that 3 defense versus 2 is relevant, and there are many reasons we can go into why that's the case, but ultimately it's the case because it's about how easy it is to remove with cards played on curve, based on their attack to trade into this, and at 1-3 this was an awkward cost to trade, which is fine. I have often talked about the fact that that's a very desirable thing to have. It's one of the reasons that certain cards, Greyhound and Panzer IIA are big examples of this, are run in decks for precisely that reason. But the fact that this could do that and also could give you a controllable draw was a bit too good. And honestly, I think given just how proliferate this card was, a little change was a good choice, and I think all of the other options for changing it would have been substantially less satisfying. You don't want to change its cost, because then it removes the whole purpose of where it sits in effectively your curve or order of battle, however you want to think of it. And you definitely aren't going to change op cost, because that would be a huge nerf, so I think this was a pretty smart move, and I like it. Overall, I think this is a pretty good change. I don't think it's going to mean this card sees infinitely removal and no one ever plays it again. I just think it means this card will be a more considered choice as to whether you need the draw or whether you would rather have a 1-drop that's a little bit more survivable. And that anything that promotes deck building choice, like engage brain, consider options, is something I'm always going to be pro. So yeah, overall I'm actually really happy with this change. I think it's pretty smart going. So we'll move on to the next card. Okay, so next card is Soviet card, and this is a card that I know many people, myself included, have wanted to see a change. I personally would have preferred to see it rotated out, but as it is, we're seeing an enabler rotated out and a change to this card. So this is push, and this is... I could go into a great deal of detail about how this goes, but in the end, push is a card which, while on the face of it not particularly amazing, combos incredibly well with a set of other cards, specifically Red Dawn, to allow you to do a crazy amount of damage to your opponent's HQ whilst still surviving yourself. It's a bit bonkers. There are lots of different ways to do it, but that is not the case now, because Great Patriotic War, another relevant card from this, Soviet Elite is Leaving Us, which was a card that made it possible to actually control the size of your opponent's HQ by reducing both HQs to 12 and then being able to proc this in a very specific way. I'm not going to do an exhibition. I think there's a video where I actually go into how push works and the mechanics of it, but ultimately this card was very frustrating to play into, and on the face of it, just increasing its cost by 1 doesn't seem like a lot. And honestly, it's not my preferred change. I would prefer to just see this card not in the game, but and just rotate it out and rework it. But this does actually significantly nerf the deck, and the reason it significantly nerfs the deck is it's going to make you have to work harder and it increases your risk. Why bear does this do those two things just for making you be like a turn or so later with playing the combo? Okay, so firstly, you have Great Patriotic War to give you the speed answer to this. Secondly, it does indeed slow you down. But thirdly, and in my opinion most importantly, the risk that this increases for you is into the returning dowding system, which is going to feature... This puts push in dowding system range, and that means that you can countermeasure this very effectively with something that isn't just ultra. And generally speaking, you can take a reasonable guess, and if you can proc dowding system on this and just obliterate the combo, you're often taking away the deck's entire purpose of being able to win, because generally a lot of push decks are incredibly monofocus. They have a 1-win condition, and it's getting to push and playing it. And they often can do it very efficiently, but if you can find one way to counter it, then you can usually just win out the rest of the game. Anyway, the secondary kind of conversation I want to have about this is that to really be able to play push kind of efficiently and early, you now are probably going to only see either Brit Ally or Brit Main push decks. The reason being the existence of aerial reconnaissance, which is a countermeasure that when your opponent deploys a unit reduces the cost of orders in your hand. That's kind of important, because the reduced cost on these enables the combo faster. So this is still going to be a thing. It is still going to be a deck that you can play, but it's going to be a deck that requires more setup, more skill to play, and play well, because you're going to have to manage your hand, find the things, time the countermeasures so that you can get the cost reductions, and watch out for countermeasure play. Overall, it just makes push a bit more awkward to play, and therefore probably means you'll see less people playing it, which I'm fine with. It is not my ideal solution. I'm not a big fan of this being in the game at all, but if it is going to be in the game, this is probably a better state for it to be in the game in, especially with the removal of Great Patriotic War. Obviously, your mileage may vary, and this one is going to polarize people, because some people are going to be very sad that this is not a bigger nerf or something that just makes the card unplayable. But honestly, if they were going to make the card completely unplayable, they'd just have rotated it. So, okay, we can work with this, but we'll see whether we see as much push. I think you're always going to see some, because there are people out there who do enjoy that particular style of deck and being able to play out the combo with a certain degree of planning and skill and consideration. It's not a no-brain win when you play push decks. You do actually have to manage your card draw and the way that you play out your hand so that you don't risk overdraw and stuff, but it's still a very polarizing card. Anyway, all just my opinion, but it's a pretty reasonable change in my opinion. If you were going to make a change, this was probably the only one you were going to see, and I think combined with the removal of Great Patriotic War, it's not terrible. Anyway, enough about push, on to the next card. So, this is the change to Devil's Brigade. This is not a huge surprise, necessarily. As you can read the text on the thing about, some of you may not be surprised by it. It's interesting. Devil's Brigade is, or rather was, an unbelievably strong card. It had kind of reached the point of becoming just a straight auto-include in any deck that could take it. And that's usually a sign that something needs to change, and I'm kind of okay with it. I don't know that I personally think it was that egregious as a special, but I do understand that if something is that intensely played and that much of an auto-include, bringing it down a peg works. And to be honest, this is not a world-breaking nerf. It again is a light touch nerf, very similar to the first one we talked about. It is just a straight reduction of defense, so that this card is easier to get rid of. Still does everything else it always did, and that can still be incredibly potent. The versatility of that deployment effect goes way, way beyond being able to just remove an Alpine unit, and arrives at all sorts of things that you can do, and I have regularly used one or two of these to actually win me the game, because I just could not get the reach to get to my opponent's last point of HQ, and then this gives it to me. You just top deck this and get the win. Also, this card saw a huge amount of play in Exile Air, and was, frankly, with Hammer Home, fairly egregious. It's not... I don't think it's removed the card's usefulness, but it has made the card very similar to the way I talked about 738 Jager. This just makes this card a card that you actually have to make an active decision about including. Is the versatility of this card going to be enough, given that it now is that little bit more fragile? And as ever, the difference between 3 and 2 remains substantial in trades. It's an important breakpoint. On the whole, I'm pretty happy with this as a change. You're not going to see me kicking and screaming about this. It's the kind of change I like to see. It's a light touch change. It's a very considered change that is just to adjust the degree to which a card is seeing play. And honestly, that's kind of what these balance patches should be for. Right, next card. Okay, so Bomber Mafia. Now, This is going to be a little bit of a longer one, I suspect, because I am, judging by people's responses to having seen this, I need to go into a bit of detail as to why this is actually a more significant change than people think it is. So, Bomber Mafia has been an absolute beast since it arrived. Like, really a beast. It's been nerfed once already. This thing is incredibly strong. It gives you access to a good area of effect damage and develops you a bomber. Nobody is playing this just for the developer bomber. You are doing this exclusively to get that AoE damage and the bomber. And that means that this was a turn 9 staple. Now, many people have observed, as they look at the change on this, that Bomber Mafia now plays on turn 9, having previously played on turn 9, and has exactly the same effect. And this is where breathtaking becomes a thing, and actually following through the significance of some of this. So let's start with the significance of the change to the card's general function, and then I'll get to another very important thing about this change. The change to function is much more nuanced than just it happens, because on the face of it, nothing has changed in the function. It still plays on turn 9, it still does 2 damage to all enemy units, and it still develops you a bomber. However, you now have 1 less credit to play that bomber, which means that you cannot, for example, play a 6-cost bomber that deals 3 damage to a random enemy unit with the 6 remaining credits that you had from this. That's actually not small. It changes the amount of resource you have available to use the bomber you've developed, and that is actually not small. There are things I'll get to in a minute that I would still prefer to see changed, but it is more substantial than you think. Secondly, and we look in the top left of this card, changing this to 4K brings it, and I said I'd mention this countermeasure again, into range of Dowding system. So this becomes yet more countermeasure play. You can see this coming, hold up something like Dowding system, and remove it. And that is a big tempo loss for your opponent, because not only is your opponent losing the 4 credits they spent, they're also losing access to expected value in the form of a bomber. Often a big bomber. Although, as I say, a smaller one now. We may actually see many players actually holding off to not play this until turn 10 if they particularly want to have the chance of getting the 6-cost bomber, or turn 11 if they want to be able to deploy one of the 7 costs, which leads me to the thing that I'm a little bit sad hasn't been changed. I would very much like the pool of bombers that this allows you to develop to not include the 2 B-24s, the J and the D. They are the 2 bombers that can be created by production order, and I have been on record many times as saying that I am fine with their existence in the world so long as they can only be produced by production order. They have no business being produced by Bomber Mafia. That still makes this an incredibly strong card, and that is something I'm going to say. While this is a change, it is more significant than people have necessarily thought it is. It's not actually going to make this, in my opinion, much less of an auto-include. This is still an unbelievably strong effect, and gives you access to 2 of the strongest bombers in the game, by just value and weight. So, I'm a little sad to see that, but I also wouldn't be at all surprised if we saw that change come in the future, where that pool gets changed, because there's been enough noise about it. But people have been asking about a big change, or at least some change to Bomber Mafia, and we do have one, and I just wanted to go out of my way to explain why it is perhaps more of a change than it looks like on the face of it, because this is an unbelievably subtle piece of rebalancing, and sometimes that can end up looking like it's changed nothing, but it actually has, if you're the kind of person like me who goes into expected values and development and then calculates based on the value that you can get out of the deployment and use of whatever bomber that you're able to develop off this, and whether the remaining credits that you have left after playing that. That's going to sound terribly nerdy to a lot of you, and is probably a video in and of itself, but that's my point. Trust me when I say that going down to only having 5 credits left after playing this is not an insubstantial change. Anywho, enough about the Mafia. We'll roll on to another card. Right, I'm going to get the I told you so's out of the way in the beginning of this, because I kind of have to cop to the I told you so on this. This is a change that I've seen coming since we actually saw this card enter the game. I've been quite vocal about the fact that I expected that this would not last past the winter expansion if it got that far in its standard form, and it hasn't. This is Shibata Regiment. This has been a card that has been unbelievably polarising. Many people celebrated its arrival because it trimmed down a number of order heavy decks that people weren't enjoying playing into. Many other people had a big issue with it because it was just such an egregiously overstrong card for its cost and rarity. As I said, this is not a shock to me. I would be very surprised if this change is in any way actually a response to community feedback. I think this change was almost certainly slated from the minute that Shibata Regiment was released. I would not be at all surprised to find out that Shibata Regiment, when it was deployed, already had a rider on it that said, we know we're changing this in the winter expansion to reduce the damage to enemy HQ to 1. And they have. Brings the card down to a much more reasonable level. I still think this card will see play because it still punishes people who are over heavy on orders. It just doesn't punish them as ridiculously hard as it did originally, and I think the text kind of sums that up quite well, which is that it's just slowing its punches down a bit now that it's kind of proven its point. We'll see if that works or not, or whether people actually do the thing which can unfortunately happen when you get a card like this that is so impactful and then gets a nerf, and then people just stop bothering playing it at all and forget how good it was. I would encourage you, if you're the kind of person who's been using this to counter orders, to still consider keeping a couple of these in your deck. Maybe not the full 4 anymore, but it's still got value, and it's still a decent body. Honestly, this, I can't say much more really, can I? Everyone knows. Anyone who's listened to any of my content or asked me any questions knows that I expected this change from the beginning, and I think this is probably about right. Enough said, really. Okay, it's buff time. It's time for cards that are being made stronger, and we are opening with a big swing. So, covert operations brought Commandos back to the fore, really tried to strengthen the Commandos archetype. Then a number of order-heavy decks got very, very strong. In particular, Push and Mill were seeing a lot of play, as was Ramp, and then Shibata turned up, and the original Shibata basically crippled the Commandos archetype. Utterly. It wasn't intentional, Commandos wasn't that egregious or powerful, it was kind of doing okay, and then it was really hard to find out whether it was actually that good or not, because just as people were starting to, in my opinion, dial in on different Commandos builds, Shibata landed, and Commandos became a suicide pact if you were against the wrong deck. But we're seeing a buff to Commando raid, and I love this change. I love this change for a number of reasons. Firstly, I kind of like that they're removing the pin. This is kind of important to see, because I'm not entirely sure that everyone's grasped the significance of this buff yet. So, firstly, this card now summons 2 number 10 Commandos to your support line, instead of 1, which in and of itself seems like a big buff because Commandos live and die off having number 10 Commandos on to proc off the orders that you're playing. But this also says deal 1 damage, and of course that 1 damage can target the opponent's HQ. It does now cost 4, and it should. But do not mistake the fact that this is a very strong card, and will be the beating heart of Commando's decks if we see it. This is a straight 3 of in any Commando-focused deck, because it's just that good. I don't think it's actually too good. I know some people think it is too good. I know some people are probably going to say this is over-strengthening Commandos. I think Commandos needs over-strengthening because there's quite a lot of counterplay out there into Commandos and suppression and other things that you can do against it, and we're seeing some more targeted damage that's coming out and other things, so I'm kind of okay with it. And I'm looking forward to trying to revitalise my Commandos various decks. At one point I had a Commandos deck for every nation, main and ally in the game. Because I was really enjoying playing with the different orders that you could proc off this and things that you could do with it. Anywho, I'm looking forward to playing with this. I personally think this is a good change to bring an archetype that they really wanted to become something that saw a lot of play, and make it a bit more competitive. Looking forward to this. Right, it's the Storm Dragon, and this one is probably going to really blindside a lot of people, because I don't know whether anyone really expected to see anything happen to this card, because it kind of just languished in a corner as a card that no one ever really played. It just wasn't doing a big thing, and the change here is very light. They've just given it Blitz. So you can now, for 12 credits, drop this and do 5 damage to something. Probably the enemy HQ, or you can just do 5 damage to something, it can take damage in return, and you can destroy all units on the board. Which is another thing that this effect does allow you to do, is control when the destruction effect goes off, so you can just use this as a ludicrously expensive board clear. But truthfully, if you were going to rework this, yeah, needed to go further. So, I mean, for comparison, I guess you would look at Shibata, which has just gone, which for 11 credits let you do 8 damage to HQ. This, for 12 credits, lets you do 5 and then gives you a destruction effect that destroys all units. That includes your own. I don't know. I don't know that this is going to see much play. I really don't know that this is actually going to change much for the existence of this card, which I actually think is kind of a shame, because I'd like to see this card brought into some kind of playability. But I mean, I kind of, if low-key you were looking to give a kind of option in the slot that Shibata was regularly occupying, but without being as ludicrously good, I'd have dropped the op cost to 2. Or made it cost 8, but I think I'd have dropped the op cost to 2. To make it a more persistent threat on the board. I think at that point this would be much more interesting, as it would fit exactly on curve where Shibata was doing its work, but do significantly less work, but give you a board clear into the bargain. The fact that this is a turn 12 play still makes it ludicrously slow, and it's not actually that threatening. So I'm kind of glad to see something happen to this. I just wish it was something better. Shame, really, but it's the step in the right direction. Gonna be positive here. It is a step in the right direction. I just think there's a couple more steps needed to make this really good. So, the SU-76M. This is a change I'm actually really glad to see. Other people may actually be surprised to see this change. I'm kind of not. This card was sadly not seeing a lot of play in Soviet self-damage, which is a shame, because this card was clearly designed for Soviet self-damage, and Soviet self-damage with the KV-2 coming back now was a thing, and I think it was a pity, actually, that this card just did not carry the weight. It did not have enough value for its cost. I think there were 2 ways you could have gone in making this better. while I personally might have preferred the other one, which I'll talk about in a minute, this is probably the smarter and more balanced way to do it. They've chosen to give an extra point of defence. I think your other option to make this something that would have been an attractive play would have been to give it Blitz. In either case, what you needed to do was put enough value on this card that it would be worth playing for the 2 damage that you're taking to your HQ. Now, of course, in the case of Soviet self-damage, you can make that 2 damage to your HQ into a kind of positive, and with this being a tank, it can trigger off the tank that, Su-80, I think, that is the tank that says every time you attack with a Soviet tank, your HQ gains 3 defense. So there are a number of reasons that this is now good to see, and honestly, I'm quite excited to see this getting a bit of a spruce up and a change. I think it needed it. It was in painful need of a buff if it was ever going to see play. As I say, I personally think I would have preferred to see Blitz, but this is actually probably a smarter, more balanced change, because that would probably actually have been too strong in the end. Honestly, it probably would have been, but I've been happy to see self-damage back, because it gives the Soviets a good spine archetype, like a good core archetype that you can point newer players at, and of course many of you will know I do a lot of new player content. This now becomes a card that we can talk about in that conversation. I like it, I think it's a good change. I have absolutely nothing negative to say about this change at all. Jager Battalion 2 gets a buff. I have mixed feelings on this. I really do, and I'll explain in a minute. But let's look at what this is. This is again a light touch change. This is just a 1-point increase to defense to make a card more appealing. And on the face of it, it turns this into a 4-cost with kind of an 8-point stat spread, and guard, which is nice, has ambush, which is nice, its operation cost is only 1, which is nice. It does bring this card to be a more desirable card to play, and I know that we have the new card which is going to be buffing Sissy, and therefore we might be seeing some more Sissy love. Like, so we have the new card, the order that when you give it, gives all of your unit, rather, you deploy it, it creates a Sissy, and then any other Sissy on the board gets +3/+3. So this is obviously trying to lean into that direction, make this a relatively appealing choice to get you more Sissy on the board. I get that, I do. My issue kind of boils down to Finland didn't need the help. Finland was already an incredibly strong ally, and it's seen some nice support over the growth of its time in the game. I don't really think this was necessary. Hot take, controversial opinion, call it what you will, but this doesn't feel like a necessary change. I honestly think it might see this Sissy archetype see play, but I still think it's not going to appeal over the already incredibly strong competition you have in Finland's cards for the 12 slots you get as an ally anyway. And this is just another reason why, if you see Finland as an ally choice in draft, you take it, regardless, because it's another incredibly good value card. Is it a bad change? No, not at all. Is it egregious or broken? Nope, no, it's probably about on balance. Probably absolutely fine in the grand scheme of things. I just don't think it was needed. And that's just my opinion, and I live and die by being honest. Next card, I guess. So this is a really interesting change. This is Attack in the Colonies, a card which was not seeing a tremendous amount of play, but did see some in Italy ally control decks. It is a very clearly control card. They have changed this so that you get an extra 2 points of defense when you deal 3 damage to an enemy for your HQ. This is really good. Do not sleep on how strong this order now is. This is 8 points of value for It's an 8-point HQ difference swing for 4 credits. Or, more specifically, it's removal and HQ defense gain. Either of these options are both good. Genuinely, this is pretty good. I'm not 100% sure where we're going to see it. I don't know whether we're going to see Italy Ally control being a thing, because control decks in general have been really struggling lately. But this is not a small buff. This is actually quite a large buff. So I think this is one to keep an eye on. We might see this, we might not, but I mean it's a welcome change for someone like me who enjoys occasionally playing a good kind of solid control deck that wants to just stall out the game and get late game value for a win. But okay, this is pretty butch now. Rolling on. 5th Legions, a card that really didn't see a lot of play. Now might. Giving this Blitz is not nothing, because it lets you time your play of this to actually proc its ability. And if you can use it to clear a unit that does like 1 damage, then suddenly this takes 1 damage and then becomes a 2/3. That's pretty good. If you find a way to give it shock, it would be even better, obviously. But yeah, this is a substantial buff. And it wants to lean into the idea of surviving combat themes, and there are some other cards that are going in that direction, particularly in Britain, that we've seen. So we'll see if that's a thing. Poland might be a thing. But, I mean, on the whole, like individually, I don't know how amazingly good this is, but this is a relatively substantial buff to a card which wasn't seeing a lot of play, so no harm, no foul in giving it a try. Don't know whether it'll be enough, but it certainly makes this a relatively attractive 1-drop, because this is 1/1, and it's 1 op cost, and it's the magical 1/3, and it has Blitz. This suddenly is a much better Greyhound, if you can trade with it, and it is a standard card. So this is not nothing. This could definitely see. I mean, this is the other thing this could find its way into is US-Poland frontline could be on its way back, which I know has been something in the past. So eyes up on this. This is not as negligible a change as you might think. This could take a card from languishing in nobody plays it to seize a lot of play. We shall see. I'm certainly excited to try it. Hope you are too. One last Polish card. This is the 7TP. This is another card that no one really saw much in the way of play, especially as a special, and the change is pretty simple. Instead of when it survives combat, you get to draw a card. It now has, you draw a card the first time a friendly unit survives combat each turn. That is a significant buff to this card draw potential, and does make this a very appealing card for value decks that need draw. Again, read my previous comments on US-Poland frontline. If you're trading and you can trade well and proc the draw off this, that's not bad. It's not an amazing body, but it's not a terrible body. But this is not a valueless card. This is not a terrible draw engine to include in a deck, and you can't hang your hat on it because there are only 2 of them in your deck, but it's a good draw augmentation, and I like seeing draw augmentation in allied nations, as many people will have heard me say. I think it's one of the things that can make an allied nation appealing. So, yeah, I like this change. I think it's interesting. I don't know whether it'll see a lot of play, but I certainly think it makes this a whole heck of a lot more appealing. Alright folks, that's it. Those are the cards that were changed, and my views on them. I had fun doing this, I had fun reading through it and giving my opinions. I look forward to hearing various other people's thoughts and opinions. As ever, you can put your opinions and thoughts in the comments. You can join my Discord through the link down below in the description. You can come join me on streams. Obviously, like, follow, all the stuff. I will definitely be back with more content, but I am very much enjoying Blood and Iron so far. Looking forward to seeing what comes up next. As always, stay well, be good human beings, and I will catch you next time.